Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. William Butler Years.
Balloons, bazookas, boobies, bosoms, boulders, cans, hooters, knockers, melons, honkers, jugs, rack, tatas, tits, torpedoes, guns, bust, doorknobs, coconuts, and our favorite one, the girls. Welcome to the All About Breastfeeding show, where your host, Lori, highlights mothers just like yourself and goes beyond the surface questions and digs deep so they share not only their joys and happiness in their daily breastfeeding life, but also their pain and struggles and how they worked through them.
Welcome to All About Breastfeeding, the place where the girls hang out. I am your host, Lori Jill Eisenstadt, IBCLC, which stands for International Board Certified Lactation Consultant, and my specialty is helping moms with breastfeeding. If you have not been on my website yet, wait until after this show is over and then head on over to allaboutbreastfeeding.biz. One of the first things you will notice is an invite to get my free tips on how to go about pumping and storing your milk. When I was pregnant for the first time, I really looked forward to being a new mom and spending lots of time with my newborn. When that time came and I was alone with her day after day after very long days, I realized that I was missing something. I denied it for a bit. I didn't allow myself to even say it out loud, that while I was really happy being a mom, it wasn't enough. I was desperate to meet other new moms and talk to them about all the changes going on in my life since becoming a mother. To admit this made me feel guilty, as if I was not a good mother. I denied those feelings way too long because after a while, I actually started to become unhappy. You can go back to episode number 9, where I talk in detail about my feelings about being a new mom and needing to have friends. I talk about how joining a mom's group was a total lifesaver for me, as I do not know what I would have done had I not met and bonded with other mothers over our shared experiences of new motherhood. Based on my personal experience, I became a facilitator, and I have since facilitated hundreds of new mothers groups. We live in such a virtual world, and my listenership is global. You are looking to get to really know other moms, spend quality time with them, and know that you have a safe place to share some of your deepest thoughts of motherhood without being judged or made to feel guilty. You're looking for a place to ask questions about your day-to-day mothering and breastfeeding life. The All About Breastfeeding Mothers Group is now forming. I have given you a snippet about what this group is all about. Head on over to allaboutbreastfeeding.biz/support for details about the November group that is forming. Don't procrastinate. I want moms to really get to know each other, and I'm purposely keeping the group to just 10 moms, and they will fill up quickly. Now, on to today's show. Let's get started. This show is the second in a set of 12 of the FAQs in which I will be answering some of the most commonly asked questions. Today's question is, why did I become an IBCLC? I get asked that almost every working day. I have to honestly say that I did not start out wanting to become an IBCLC. It's one of those things that really just did fall in my lap. And after the first of my first baby, Alicia Heather, I was not thrilled at how I was treated prenatally or during the birth. So I purposely set out to make things better for myself for my next pregnancy. I remember going to the libraries and looking for any videos or books talking about birth, and I learned a lot. And from that learning, I then decided I'm going to become a childbirth educator so I could learn more for myself and that I could teach other people what I wish that I would have known, because I felt in my childbirth classes, I was basically taught not necessarily how to be a birthing mom and work along with my labor. I really felt like I was taught how to be a good hospital patient. I became certified as a childbirth educator, and I learned so much for myself, and I began teaching others what I learned. Along the way, I realized I wanted to help other women, not just educating them about their pregnancy, but I also saw a need to help them during their labor. There was a void in the continuous care they needed. I recognized this, and I decided to become a birth doula, and I began going to births. And wow, this was one of the most amazing times of my life. At this point, I had 3 children, a baby who was about a year, and I had a 2.5-year-old and a 5.5-year-old. And I became a birth junkie. I started my own business, and I called it Pregnancy Connections. I taught childbirth classes, and I attended births as a doula. I went to hospital births, birthing center births, and home births. And I just absolutely was in love with birth. I soon began having bigger dreams as I fantasized about becoming a midwife. When I moved from New York to Arizona, I intended on pursuing midwifery. This was a field that I had dreamt about for many years. However, I could not pursue it full force while my kids were younger. While I could not go to midwifery school, I spent money on books and joined together with a small group of moms who also were bitten by the birth junkie bug. We met on a regular basis and we taught each other. We invited midwives to come and teach us. They were great times, and while I did not continue on my path to become a midwife, I cherished those times spent with my BFFs. By the time I moved from New York to Arizona, the kids were older, more self-sufficient. Everyone was finally sleeping through the night, and they could make meals themselves, do their own laundry, be responsible for doing their own schoolwork, and they could be left home for quite a few hours by themselves. This was my criteria for being able to move forward with midwifery. In New York, I had a nice business teaching childbirth classes and taking on private doula clients. When I moved to Arizona, I did my best to find a midwifery apprentice, but I just was not successful. While waiting for the perfect opportunity to come knocking on my door, I decided to start teaching childbirth classes again. And I became employed by local hospitals. And it is here that I met my first IBCLC. She was a nurse and an IBCLC. Bonnie was part of the education department, and yet she was not teaching most of the classes, just the breastfeeding ones. I remained curious about what it is she actually did, because I know she worked full-time for the hospital, but I was new, and I really didn't want to ask her. Until one day, my curiosity got the best of me, and I did ask. She told me she was on staff as the IBCLC. I remember saying, "As what?" She told me what the letters stood for, and I'd never heard of this before. Not really thinking, I asked Bonnie, well, what is it exactly that you do all day? You work a 40-hour week, right? I soon look back on that day, and I'm clearly embarrassed to say that I asked her this, and I can only imagine how insulting it seemed to her. But she was nice and kind, and she never said anything. In my defense, this was in 1998. I had never met an IBCLC in New York, and I was really active in the childbirth community. Here in Arizona, I learned that there was not even an IBCLC working in every hospital, and when there was, there certainly was not enough coverage, so the field was still in its infancy, as far as I knew and as far as I was concerned. I guess I didn't insult her or piss her off enough, nearly as much as I thought I might have, as one day, after asking her more questions, she invited me to come watch her work one day. I turned her down several times before one day finally saying, "Okay." My interest at that point had been piqued. So I accepted her invitation to come watch her work one day. I call this part shadowing Bonnie. I drove 45 minutes in traffic to get to the hospital that she worked at. I was introduced to her supervisor and welcomed to the unit by several other nurses. At this point, I was actually teaching childbirth classes at this hospital, but it was downstairs in the basement, and the only time I really went up to the maternity unit was after classes in the evening. I would go up to the maternity unit and I would bring them all the food that the couples at my childbirth class did not eat, and I brought it for the nighttime staff. And they were always appreciative. But it was usually a quick bring it to them, and then I was on my way home. So I really was not familiar with much of the staff. So Bonnie introduced me to her supervisor, and like I said, I was welcomed to the unit by several other nurses. It is a wonder that Bonnie did not kick me to the street that day. I have a weird and quirky sense of humor and sometimes find it hard holding back when something makes me laugh. Bonnie was quite a few years older than me and very, very straight-laced. When she said that she was going to introduce me to the nurse who supervised the nursery and told me her name, I was like, really? You have got to be kidding. Cynthia Topless. I said topless, as in like topless? And Bonnie said quite firmly, and with a tad bit of disapproval about my reaction, topless, spelled Topliss. I said, oh, okay, well, I can't wait to meet her. I mean, come on. All right. For those who are judging me right now, you got to admit, last name Topless on a maternity unit, that's just as bad as a male OB in the town that I grew up in, Gregory Seaman. Yes, spelled Seaman. But an OBGYN with the last name Seaman, I told you, things strike me as funny. And perhaps they do you, or you can at least see the humor in it. After some introductions, I went from room to room to room with her. I watched Bonnie, and I watched her interact with each mom, dad, baby, and family members. I have to say, it was far from what I expected. But then again, I had come into this with a preconceived notion of what her job would look like. Just meeting moms, saying hi to their baby, and giving them a nice touch on the shoulder, telling them they were doing a good job and their baby was latched on nicely. I expected her to give some review of what they had learned in class and then move on to the next mom. What I thought and what I experienced were two totally different animals. The first thing that left an impression on me was how much formula there was in each room. I knew moms received formula in the hospital. In the hospital classes, free bags were given out. It was just that seeing it in the rooms had a greater impact on me. There were 6-packs and sometimes several 6-packs that had been given to the moms of formula. Plus, if they were about to be discharged, they had these bags that were given by the formula companies sitting with all the other stuff they were bringing home. And these bags were filled with, guess what? More free formula and coupons for formula and booklets from the formula companies that talked about breastfeeding being the best, but if it didn't work out or you didn't make enough, then this formula, which is just like mother's milk, we have coupons and free formula for you in this lovely black bag. There were other kinds of freebies like ice packs and measuring tape with the formula company's name on it, all with the formula company's logo on them and more coupons for formula. The second thing I noticed is the lack of babies. Where were all the babies? Well, some were in the mom's room, all bundled up with hats and several layers of blankets, and in the crib, all by themselves. Other babies were in the nursery. You see, we came in about 7:30 a.m., and lots of babies were being cared for in the nursery so the parents could sleep. While they were cared for in the nursery, It was not unusual for them to have had a bottle or two and come back with pacifiers in their mouths and bottles of formula in their crib drawers. Yes, these babies and these cribs were well stocked. And yes, there were some babies with their mommies, thank goodness. Many of the moms seemed to lack the knowledge and the confidence in their ability to breastfeed, or that they even had milk. Some of the information they had was from family members who told them they had no milk yet and had to give their baby formula until their milk came in. Others had tried squeezing their breast, and they showed me, and they said there's no milk. And when they couldn't see any milk coming out of their nipples, they just assumed they did not have milk for their baby. Other moms had a few breastfeeding so far, and their nipples were hurting, or they were saying they did not think their babies were getting enough because they just wanted to keep eating and eating. They only lasted a half hour, an hour, or some babies lasted 2 hours, but moms had the impression that their baby should last a lot longer. Other babies had slept so much that the staff said, well, when a certain amount of hours passed and their baby needed to eat and they did not wake up, what they did was wake them up and push formula on them. Out of the first 4 moms we saw, and I will never forget this, Bonnie was able to work with 1 mom and baby pair. The mom was ready and the baby was hungry. Each of the others, there was another story. In the afternoon and several moms later, the reasons continued. The baby had just been fed by dad, or the nursery, they'd just been fed. Mom had a cesarean section. The baby just had a bottle because the baby was still hungry after breastfeeding. Maybe the baby was still in the nursery. Maybe the parents wanted to breastfeed, but they asked us to come back because they had visitors. Sure, we did get to work with a few moms, and this made me feel really good as I watched Bonnie help, educate, and advocate for each mother. The other thing that left an impression on me was that Bonnie was kept busy just from the 4 or 5 moms she actually got to help with breastfeeding. In her approximate 8-hour shift, what would happen actually is if all the other moms who really needed help, they would not have been able to get help from her, because I doubt she would have been able to offer them each the same individual and dedicated attention she gave to each mother she did have the pleasure of helping with breastfeeding. Very quickly, I realized I loved watching Bonnie work with the moms and dads. She had a quiet and gentle presence. She had this incredible knack for making them feel good, for boosting their confidence, for helping them open up to her and ask questions. Bonnie focused on the mom, and yet she also recognized the importance of including dad in on all of this. After all, she would say, I don't go home with you. I thought, what a quandary. Circumstances did not allow for her to help all the moms, but if they did, time would not have allowed her anyway. There was a time spent with each mom, and then there was a need to chart on each mom and add these papers to each mom's charts, communicate with her nurse if needed. This took a lot of time. I had no idea. So in an 8-hour shift, she could work really well with about 4 or 5 moms. And frankly, most of the time, that's about all the moms who were breastfeeding and wanted help. I was frustrated by what I saw because there were so many other moms on the unit. But I was intrigued to say yes to coming back another day when Bonnie invited me. The second day, I was not so distracted with all of the unknowns of the unit, the staff, the charting, and I just concentrated on what Bonnie was doing. I was able to see her in action, and I was able to witness the difference she could make. She could take a teary-eyed mom who had a huge lack of confidence and a worried way about her and turn the whole situation around. She could take a mom who thought they had no milk and couldn't put their baby to the breast just because they felt that they didn't even know how to, and she spent time with them, and in a relatively short period of time, that mom's confidence was boosted, and when we left the room, that mom was, I can breastfeed my baby. I am breastfeeding my baby. At the end of the second day, Bonnie complimented me on some of the verbal interactions I had with moms. Bonnie tells me that she had just taken training to become an IBCLC teacher, and would I want to become an IBCLC? Aha! No wonder she kept encouraging me to come in and watch her. She later told me that from watching me as a childbirth educator and in the meetings, she had her eye out on me as a potential student. She could tell that I had good communication skills, was a good listener, could be empathetic when needed, and I knew how to talk to the postpartum mother, and I was used to teaching classes and relating to parents. I already had a very good skill set in areas that she said was actually difficult to teach someone. The clinical skills that I needed, she felt confident she could teach and I could learn. She was roping me in. At first, I turned her down flat, because this isn't what I had planned on doing. I went home and I thought about it. When she asked me, I said no again. Then I thought some more, enough to find out exactly what was going to be required of me anyway. The first thing I did was to take a good look at what I was in for as far as time and financial commitment. What coursework and clinical was expected of me? Based on the fact that I was not an RN and I had no formal way to account for all the hours I had taught breastfeeding classes over the last 10 years, no way of measuring all my hours spent, I had nothing to show for it. So basically, I was going to need to begin at the beginning. I was looking at the 2-year plan, which would cover clinicals, hands-on help, and all the educational requirements, plus several thousands of dollars spent. I paid my teacher. There were books and classes and exam fees and liability insurance. The biggest thing that stood out to me was, if I moved forward with this, I would not be able to pursue midwifery, at least for the next few years. Remember, I was waiting for someone to roll out the red carpet for me and accept me as a midwifery apprentice. After nights of tossing and turning, my lovely husband helped me make the final decision. At this point, I was teaching at least 2 or 3 childbirth or breastfeeding or infant care classes a week at 2 different hospitals. And Alan asked me 2 questions. He said, "Is this something you could see yourself doing for many years?" And I said, "Yeah, I could actually." "Is midwifery something you could see yourself doing for many years?" And I said, "Yes, I definitely can." Well, at first blush, you might say, a lot of help that was. Then he asked me some other questions. He asked, "How likely is it that you're going to find a midwifery apprentice in the next year?" Well, I thought about it and I said, "Highly unlikely." Then he asked me, "If you started tomorrow, how many years would it take you from beginning to end?" And I said, "About 4 years." Then Alan asked me, "How likely do you think this opportunity to be a student of lactation will come around again?" And I said, "Well, that's highly unlikely too." Then he said, "If you start tomorrow, how many years would it take you from beginning to end?" And I said, 2 years. The answer became more clear. I might not find a midwifery apprentice for a while, if at all. And it will take me 4 years after that to complete. I did have a once-in-a-lifetime, which, as far as I was concerned, it was a once-in-a-lifetime, opportunity to train with an experienced IBCLC who believed in me, and it would take about 2 years. I contemplated some more. Someone had to pay for all this, so I would have to keep teaching. I would spend days on the maternity unit, a good 40-hour work week, and 2 nights a week teach childbirth and breastfeeding classes, and of course, study in between in my free, quote-unquote, spare time. So, I worked out an arrangement with Bonnie. I purchased liability insurance. I figured out what it was going to cost. I filled out all the paperwork and I signed my letter of intent of all the requirements I had to accomplish. And as I wrote out the plan, I could see that for me, this was going to be quite a few several thousands of dollars and a 2-year plan before I was to complete the prerequisites and all required experiences before I was even eligible to take that once-a-year exam. This was a big commitment. And up to this time, I had devoted 6 months, basically, to becoming a childbirth educator. And it also took me about 6 months to become a birth doula. And now I was going to be on a 2-year plan to become an IBCLC. Well, I chose the IBCLC, and rarely have I looked back. I was fortunate enough to have about 10 doula clients over the next 2 years, and working in the hospital that had a large midwifery practice whose moms birthed in the hospital, I got to see quite a few more births and was able to be in the recovery room for many moms for that first latch. So I was able to get my birthing fix paid attention to at the same time. There were definitely enough times of frustration at the system, and definitely many times we spent banging our heads against the wall. And yet, whenever we work with the mom and baby and we're able to help them with beginning breastfeeding, answer all their questions, and be a valued person in their life who helped them get off to a great breastfeeding start, well, this always made up for the hard parts of the job. At first, when training with Bonnie, I basically sat on my hands, so to speak, and I just watched, listened, and learned from Bonnie. Gradually, I was able to take on more and more responsibility. It took about 4 months or so and perhaps 300 mothers until I was working directly with moms, and Bonnie was always in the room overseeing things. It was a gradual move until I could be on my own with a mom, with Bonnie not needing to be in the room, but definitely on the floor within shouting distance. As I became better and more confident in my skills, and she felt I would be okay to be alone with the mom, I did more and more on my own. I had to work with all kinds of breastfeeding challenges: premature babies, moms with cesarean sections, moms with flat nipples, inverted nipples, mothers who had medical conditions that made it difficult for them to be breastfeeding, autoimmune diseases, lupus, MS. They had breast challenges such as implants, multiple times implants, biopsies, breast abscesses, and working with babies who were born really early or with cleft lip and or palate, babies with other special needs, breathing issues, adoptive moms, surrogate moms. And not just one experience. I had this purple book. It was called The Blueprint for Lactation, I think. And as far as like premature babies, I needed to see at least 25 or 30 premature babies and work closely with them, with Bonnie overseeing, before I completed that requirement. I needed to see, I don't know how many mothers with flat nipples and inverted nipples. Again, not just 1 or 2, but 25 or 30 or more, and work closely with them, seeing them from beginning to the end. I really got a fabulous education, and I was so grateful for all that Bonnie taught me and the mothers taught me. When time came for me to fulfill the requirements, such as working with older babies and toddlers in an outpatient setting, Bonnie and I started a breastfeeding mothers group in the 2 hospitals we were affiliated with. In this group, I was able to work directly with moms who had older babies who had other issues. At this point, moms are having issues with thrush, not enough milk, oversupply, vasospasm, Raynaud's, babies who had nursing strikes, they were teething, they got teeth, mothers who had a low supply, babies who moms were back at work and the babies were refusing bottles, something called reverse cycling. There were so many things that go on after that first few days in the hospital. A big shout out to any of those moms in the first few groups we started. As your babies, I know, they're now in high school, and some might even be in their first or second year of college. This is insane, even as I say it out loud. Bonnie and I worked together so I could have as many varied experiences as I possibly could in that 2-year period. Her sister was an IBCLC in a local WIC office, so I spent days observing her sister at work, and I asked her tons of questions. I spent quite a bit of time in pediatric offices and some OBGYN offices and midwives' offices observing how they communicated with the breastfeeding mother and care plans that they put mothers on. In all of these different offices, I got to see how staff related to the mom, how they prepared her for the newborn, and how they helped her with breastfeeding and helped her troubleshoot problems she had once her baby was born. I even spent some time in a large breastfeeding clinic observing other experienced IBCLCs in other settings doing their job. During this time, I worked with moms who had hearing impairment, physical disabilities, major health issues, adoptive moms, young mothers who were living in impossible home situations, and some homeless, all who were determined to breastfeed their baby. I am incredibly grateful for the many families I work with and learn from. Having these varied experiences is largely responsible for the IBCLC I am today. Our goal, Bonnie's and mine, was for me to have a wide range of experiences helping moms and babies in all sorts of situations by the time it came to take the exam. I put in at least 2,000 clinical hours, and I saw over 1,000 mothers by the time I took the exam in July of 2001. At that time, it took 3 months to find out if you passed the exam. I continued teaching classes at the hospital and was absolutely ecstatic at the opportunity that came my way. I was interviewed for a very prestigious position at BestFed, a breastfeeding store that sold pumps and pillows and nursing bras and baby carriers. They also employed IBCLCs who saw moms on an individual basis in private consults. This was the only store of its kind in all of Phoenix, and some very experienced IBCLCs were working there. After a nerve-wracking interview, I was offered the position, and you bet your sweet bippy I said yes, yes, yes. There were limitations what I could do at that time, at least until I had confirmation that I passed the exam. Do you have any idea how long those 3 months of waiting were to be able to work with a mom privately? But in October of 2001, I became a fully fledged certified IBCLC, and I could begin breathing easier. Even at that time, I spent the first year continually asking questions of the experienced IBCLCs, who would continually tell me, "Lori, go back in the room. You got this. You know your stuff." I was grateful to be able to have them to bounce ideas off of. So there you have it, why I became an IBCLC and the path I took to become one. I hope this has been interesting as well as inspiring to any new lactation students or to anyone who is thinking of becoming an IBCLC. I have so many fun and interesting stories and entertaining stories to tell of my early days. Perhaps I will get to that on another show. In the meantime, I will leave you with this quote. When you teach what you love and share what you know, you open eyes, minds, hearts, and souls to unexplored worlds. And there's one other that I love. The mediocre teacher tells, the good teacher explains, the superior teacher demonstrates, and the great teacher inspires. I would like to dedicate this show to my great, fabulous, wonderful teacher, Bonnie Jones. I wish you well, always and forever. Love, Lori. Until the next show, bye-bye.